Chapter 11. The New Political Anthropology. The Political Man and His Mutations. Man as a Function of Politics. What man is derived not from himself as an individual, but from politics. It is politics, being the dispositive of violence and legitimate power, that defines the man. It is the political system that gives us our shape. Moreover, the political system has an intellectual and conceptual power, as well as a transformative potential without limitations. The answer to the anthropological question rests on the configuration of power in society. Power itself consists of two elements. First is the power to shape the paradigm, integrated in society through state institutions, and second is power as the dispositive of violence, which serves as a means to integrate the paradigm into the society. Consequently, the single, highest authority of power and its structure controls our political concept of man in a given society. The sphere of political anthropology emerges here, the study of the political concept of man. But there is also the concept of the political man. The difference between these two categories is that the political concept of man is the concept of the man as such, which is installed in us by the state or the political system. The political man is a particular means of correlating man with this state and political system. At first, the state or political system installs this concept in us, and then it both grants and takes away our rights. However, on the preconceptional level, on the level of political anthropology, it falls to us to give our own rights and to add a political status. We believe that we are causa sui, generated within ourselves, and only then do we find ourselves in the sphere of politics. In fact, it is politics that constitutes us, whether we are born in a maternity hospital or in an open field, whether we are carried into a ward with electricity or a dark, smoky hut, depends on politics. Politics grants us our political status, our name, and our anthropological structure. Man's anthropological structure shifts when one political system changes to another. Consequently, the political man and our political anthropology alike are given different shapes after the conversion from traditional to modern society. If we remain within the bounds of conventional political anthropological structures, which were described in great detail in my book, The Philosophy of Politics, we may stress two notions. First, we can say, look how tremendous the shift in the political anthropology is that resulted from the conversion of the traditional state to the modern state. We may be astonished by it. We may be amazed at how it is not only the political institutions, but also man himself that is transformed on the most fundamental level. But later, we inevitably encounter the fact that, right now, we are in the state of shifting from the political mode of modernity to postmodernity, and we realize that a completely new view surrounds us. It becomes clear from our perspective that the parameters of both the traditional and modern society flow one into the other. In fact, Homo politicus, the political man, was postulated in both of these paradigms. Of course, on the pole of modernity, we have the rational, autonomous individual, and we have a particle of a certain holistic ensemble on the other pole. As for postmodernity, it declares that there are no differences as such between these two types of society, politics, and concepts of man. It matters not whether this very man is constituted according to the liberal, individualist approach or by the holistic ethos. It is man which is the outcome. Boundaries of post-anthropology and the origin of post-politics. At this stage, we are able to single out completely new symptoms of the type of man constituted by the politics of postmodernity: depolitization, autonomization, microscopization, and sub- and transhumanization. That is, today man is not regarded as a whole, his parts are considered to be independent. It is his desires, emotions, moods, and inclinations that matter. At the same time, While on the one hand attention is transferred from the individual to the sub-individual level, on the other hand, the sub-individual level merges with other sub-individualities. That is, it enters the domain of the trans-individual. The chaos of a contemporary dance club can be regarded as a metaphor for this trans-individuality. It is possible to distinguish between pairs, figures, styles of expression, and sexes during quadrille or even rock dancing, which is late modernity. But in a modern dance club, there are creatures of uncertain sex, undefined appearance, and vague identity, regularly moving to the beat of the music. Moreover, the dancing has a hyper-individualistic nature. The dancers are not moving. They are being moved. What moves each dancer moves the others. Are they moving separately? No. Their bodies are moving simultaneously, giving in to a common resonance. Something like this is happening in politics. The de-individualization of the individual and the sub- and trans-individualization of political institutions and structures. Thus, we are confronting a completely new politics, the essence of which is the denial of politics itself as a certain distinct, authoritative line. No matter how we solve the question of power, to whom it belongs, to the elite, to the caste, to the priests, to the warriors, or to the democratic parliament, it will still be a formalization of political relations. Interests, positions, levels, statuses, and roles are always visible. We are dealing with a political society, be it modern or traditional. But if one proposes to remove the very question of power, if one says there is no such concept, if we are compelled to withdraw this question, if the notion of the subject of the political process is forbidden, it will be ousted by a rhizomatic entity, which Hart and Negri name a multitude. These multitudes act for both subject and authority. Consequently, the concept of the state is replaced by the concept of the post-state. What is the post-state? It is the idea of the abolition of the state. The process of the demonization of the state starts, the basis of which is the thesis that the state interferes with private property. The word, the state, itself eventually becomes an invective, and after this, its abolition becomes an obvious measure. After that, everything that interferes with the absolute freedom is abolished. In the end, all forms of vertical symmetry, the orientation of a top-to-bottom hierarchy, are subject to destruction, and everything becomes horizontal. Similarly, the vertical lines of power and the state become horizontal, and thus political anthropology, implying this or that constitution of the individual, dissipates and disperses in the space of rhizomatic dust. One could call it apoliteia. But if it really were apoliteia, we would observe a gradual fading of the political, its entropy. But we are not speaking about apoliteia, or indifference towards politics. Instead, we encounter a deliberate, axiological trend. That is, the liquidation of political structures, or the structure of the political, if we include the structures of both political pre-modernity and modernity. That is, while confronting post-modernity, both of them are rejected. At the same time, in order to actively denounce the political will is required. It turns out that post-modernity is loaded with political meaning, and it is loaded with an imperious, epistemological, obsessional meaning, and an obligatory political meaning of apolitization at that. That is, this is not pure entropy of the political structure. It is a revolutionary counter-project, a theoretical scheme of political post-anthropology, and the core of this post-anthropology is, of course, this rhizomatic sub- and trans-individual network. It is this dispersed nebula of multitude that is deliberately destroying the structures of the will that belong to the political, in its classical Schmittian meaning. The core subjects of post-politics. Today we can sum up the situation in this way. We add the destructive, corrosive strategy of political postmodernity, possessing the same authoritative, defensive dispositive, into the sphere of the political, and we receive politics in its widest meaning, in its absolute meaning. This is the absolute political, in the boundaries of which we can place two basic anthropological models. It sounds natural. The first is, quote, contemporary man, constructed by the political, struggling against politics as such. He is like a dancer at a club. He has his blog, he watches TV, he pretends he votes for the opposition. That is, he latently identifies himself with the destructive, anti-state political trend, even if he lacks a well-thought-out, coherent politics. When confronting any integral political concept, he starts by saying no. His attitude towards it is very aggressive, and it creates a specifically aimed influence. The other figure is the political soldier, das Politiksoldat. The political soldier is a different concept, developed in the 1930s, which is a personality, summing up what we have called the political approach to das Politik, the classical approach to the political. Its definition is very picturesque. The political soldier differs from the common man by the fact that he kills and dies for politics. His killing and personal death become an existential element of the manifestation of the political, and thus, for him the political acquires an existential dimension. The politician, unlike the political soldier, deals with the political, but never kills or dies for it. When the politician confronts death and murder, he says, "No, I'd better rethink my convictions." This is a wonderful romantic image, employed as a part of modernity and the 20th century, where we could see these splendid political soldiers. Nietzsche's words illustrate their role in the history of the 20th century. Although wars in the 19th century were fought for material goals, quote, "A warlike age is approaching that will above all restore honor to bravery, for it shall pave the way for a still higher age and gather the strength that the latter will one day need, the age that will carry heroism into the search for knowledge and wage wars for the sake of thoughts and their consequences." When is this time? It was the 20th century. The entirety of the 20th century was filled with political soldiers killing each other for their beliefs. They killed and were killed. Besides, every traditional society was founded by political soldiers. The Russian Empire was also built by political soldiers. Modernity was very sensitive to this figure. They say the political soldier fights only for elevated and spiritual ideas, but that is not the case. Even a liberal can become a political soldier. He may die for quite senseless ideas, but he remains a political soldier, and that is very important. The political soldier is an instrumental notion, and should not be hyperbolized. It is a charming, but purely utilitarian element of modernity. We believe that on the level of political anthropology, this political soldier is confronting the decomposed, rhizomatic post-human android. We register this reading, and it may seem that we are ready to throw away our ideological differences and for the political soldier to confront the postmodern world. But my thesis is that, from the perspective of the phase shift we are in, we are living in a society where this conflict is possible, but, at the same time, its outcome is predetermined. In fact, the figure of the political man is removed, and his anthropological space is being occupied by a new personality, a very cunning and suspect personality, which is not that of the political soldier, but, at the same time, is not related to the hissing, rhizomatic, twittering sub-individual. This personality is the political man's simulacrum. It is something that imitates the political soldier, in the same way that postmodernity imitates modernity. In the final analysis, the readings do not give us the, quote, human versus post-human scenario. Instead, what we see is the undisguised rotten liberal post-human and the pseudo-human, the pseudo-soldier, within whom the general substance of this phase of history has found itself. This is why we have the phenomenon of contemporary fascism, which is an excellent illustration of this condition. Every last vestige of fascism that was embodied by political soldiers ran out in 1945. Each and every declared fascist after 1945 is a simulacrum. The liberals' fears taking the form of fascists is a complete parody. They do not differ much from the decomposed and half-dissolved masses. Communism, which has held out longer than fascism, created its simulacrum within itself. The late communists were already pseudo-political soldiers. Today, there are no chances for communism to return to life. The same goes for fascism. Soon, we will see that liberalism has arrived at the same point. At least our liberals, who are not really liberals at all, demonstrate this. Give them some money, and they will declare anything and everything. We are dealing with entities lacking anything resembling the classical political anthropology. The fatalism of post-anthropology and angiology. As much as can be discerned, we are dealing with Deleuze's fold. The concept allows for creative thought about the production of subjectivity, and ultimately about the possibilities for and the production of non-human forms of subjectivity. We have the confrontation of post-political anthropology and the pseudo-political soldier. In this case, the antithesis of the post-human is the non-human. If we face it, we acquire a very complex and intriguing perspective. It is either phantasmagoric despair, to which Baudrillard, describing the world with radical post-historical categories, gave way, or the feeling that we are not satisfied with this fold, this post-anthropological perspective. However, if we grasp the fatality of this pair, we can calmly step back and assess the situation. Having raised the question of anthropology, we must look for a solution, and at the same time we must acknowledge this post-anthropology, that is, not wait for what is coming to arrive, but to consider, instead, that it is already here. What do we gain from this perspective? I think that Schmitt, who created the classical approach to the political, might give us some hints. He spoke about political theology. Schmitt said that all political ideologies and systems are integral theological models with religions, dogmas, institutions, and rights of their own. This is why, in order to understand politics, one must regard it as a religious phenomenon. But political theology presupposes the existence of the political telos, which can be constructed by man, like Hobbes's Leviathan, or it can be of non-human construction, such as the Catholic model of imperium, which was close to Schmitt's heart. Naturally, in the post-anthropological structure, in postmodernity, this appeal to telos as a political factor which unfolds the system into an integral theology will not help us much, as we have crossed the boundaries of political theology. It is impossible to speak about political anthropology while describing the post-anthropological model of today's politics. We are forbidden to speak about an integral political theology because we have witnessed this fundamental mutation of the quote fold. What are we allowed to speak about? We have political processes, sources of power, and dispositives of influence. We observe paradigmatic epistemologies, which are pushed and promoted in the same way as they were in the framework of classical politics. They remain with us, which means that the political in its wider sense is here. It is simply that neither man nor God is there. Who is the actor of this post-politics? There is a certain hypothesis that I call the concept of angelopolis, the quote city of angels, or angelopolitia, angelic politics, that is a turn from political theology to political angelology. What this means is that the sphere of the political is starting to be controlled by and is starting to ground itself upon the confrontation between superhuman entities. That is, entities that are neither human nor divine. Angelopolis possesses a huge potential to assign political roles without taking humanoid and post-humanoids into account. For example, one may think that a man sends an SMS, but it is actually the SMS that sends itself. Considering the growing level of standardization and lack of originality in these messages, its over-individualistic essence is becoming more and more evident. There really is a command center in post-politics. There are actors, and there are decisions, but they are totally dehumanized in postmodernity. They are beyond the frames of anthropology. We can find a certain proof of this hypothesis in traditional teachings and in traditional eschatologies, which state that the end times will not be triggered by the human hand, but that it will stop just prior to the final hour. The final act will not depend on man. It will be a war of angels, a war of gods, a confrontation of entities, not tied by historical or economic laws and patterns, and which do not identify themselves with religions or certain political elites. And this angelic war can be thought of politically, that is, angelopolis or politic angelog, which I bring forward as a concept devoid of mysticism and esotericism, which has the same sense in nature as Schmidt's metaphor of political theology. Political angelology must be considered as a metaphor which is both scientific and rational. Angelopolis is a method to understand, to interpret, and to hermeneutically decipher the contemporary processes which surround us and are regarded as being alienated from political anthropology, from humanity as a species, and as a politically institutionalized and constituted notion. Chapter 12. Fourth Political Practice. The adherents of the fourth political theory are in need of a plan. The plan is based on the following idea. If we have the fourth political theory as a set of concepts and a theoretical definition, then this theory must be realized, because every theoretical construction can either be brought to life or cannot because of circumstances. Therefore, if we theorize and talk about the fourth political theory, we should also think about how it could be realized in practice. However, this should give us pause, because the fourth political theory strains to conclude the political topography of modernity, with all its implicit and hidden dualistic models therein. We can develop a scheme representing the correlation between the theory and its practice in different fields of knowledge: science, metaphysics, religion, philosophy, technology, and common use. Below is a table with these different fields of knowledge on the horizontal axis and with two columns on the vertical axis, terms 1 and terms 2. The first column concerns the field theoretically, and the second deals with the field in practice. Of course, the consideration of these columns in itself can bring us to some very interesting conclusions. Starting with the question of what theory is in terms of science, and what is praxis. When the problem of defining what a thing is arose a few years ago, the attempts to come across a counterpart of this basic term in contemporary philosophy led to the revelation that there is no acceptable equivalent for this Latin word in Greek at all. There is pragma as in action and the act at the same time. It is an active object, but not as an accomplishment. And there is an existent from Aristotle, which is expounded as res in further Latin translations. Therefore, there is no such word as thing in Greek. This is very important, because it means that the concept of reality is also absent. Reality is formed on the basis of res. Reality is a property of res. Reality is something referring to the thing or thingness. Therefore, there are the Greek words pragma, existent, and practice for the Latin res. Pragma is the action and the object at the same time. It is very interesting. The entirety of Greek metaphysics evolves between theory as contemplation and action, keeping short of severe Latin subjectivity, the thingness hidden in the term res. If we amplify the aforementioned duality of this table, we could come across Guinon's model of the principle of the manifested, notably that the manifestation here is closer to the practice, but not to that which is manifested. We can see the activity in the second column, concerning practice. If we make some further assertions in the history and sociology of religion, we could come across functionalism and the human sociology of Malinowski, which examines this division between myth and ritual. The original Greek definition of myth must be remembered. Myth is a story being told during a ritual. The duality of myth and ritual is one of the basic items extensively discussed in both the history of religion and of social anthropology. In philosophy can be seen the mentality activity, or mental activity. This pairing and duality of terms is similar to that of theory practice. And finally, technology is rather simple. It is the duality of a project and its realization. So, we have two columns. If the fourth political theory is added to the first column, term 1, then we can probably find some specific concept in the fourth political practice to place in the column term 2 in accordance with it. If the fourth political theory was an ideological variation, or some combination of the elements of the political theories of modernity, we would follow this strictly. That is to say, if we create an additional concept, constructed of the same elements and based on the same topography as the political ideologies of modernity are, we should talk about the field not only theoretically, but also in practice, in the column term 2. And generally, it would be interesting to do this, because talking about semantic fields associated with the fourth political theory in connection with the column term 2 could be very useful. But I leave this problem for someone else, and propose another way. The point is that if we talk about the very core of the fourth political theory and its fundamental problems, we understand that the main idea of the fourth political theory is to walk away from the dualism between the subject and the object, between intention and realization, and from the dual topography which the philosophy of modernity, the science of modernity, and the politology of modernity are based on. It is not mere chance that we talk about Dasein as the subject of political theory. Dasein, as proposed by Heidegger, is a way to overcome the subject-object duality, that is, an aspiration to find the root of ontology. Heidegger mentions the Zwischen, or the between, while talking about the existence of Dasein. The principal nature of Dasein is being between. Dasein is Zwischen. We should not use the system of classical political dualism, the scientific topography of both modernity and Aristotle's time while talking about the fourth political theory, and presume the fact that the subject and its core, the basis of the fourth political theory pole, is Dasein. It is necessary, instead, to examine fourth political practice in another way, taking into account Heidegger's criticisms of constructing non-fundamental ontology, i.e., ontology as it is. Heidegger said that if we want to understand Dasein, we should realize and construct a fundamental ontology which would not lose contact with the ontic, that which exists, reality, which are the roots of Dasein, and would not ascend or sublimate, sooner or later, to anything correlating with the 2,000-year-old, from Plato or even the last of the pre-Socratic philosophers up to Nietzsche, general philosophical constructions on which modernity is based. We should put Dasein as the center and the pole of the fourth political theory. What does this mean in the context of practice? It means that Dasein should not be qualified either as a theoretical construction or as a principle. Should it be used as a myth, like a narrative? This comes much closer, but it should be carefully considered. It should not exactly be used as a mentality, at least not as an ontological mentality. Likewise, it should not be used as an idea or anything concerning the subject. Keeping this universal and pre-dualistic status of Dasein in Heidegger's philosophy in mind, I want to suggest a reference to some root, to something that predates this dualism, to define fourth political practice. In other words, what is the center of fourth political practice? This center is something that lies between the columns, between terms 1 and terms 2, between theory and practice. But this does not at all mean their combination or a happy medium. A quote-unquote happy medium is nonsense that we should distance ourselves from. We should not look for a happy medium or a compromise of column 1 and column 2, the polarity of theory and practice, but we should find the root that these pairs grow from, their common root. From the perspective of Dasein analytics, both the subject and object are ontological constructions, grown from the quote-unquote between, i.e. the Inzwisken. We are interested in the instance that both theory and practice appeared from, the instance where theory and practice are not yet divided, and, a fortiori, are not opposites. We are interested in that kind of instance where both principle and manifestation have a common root. That kind of instance where myth and ritual are not yet separated. At that instance where mentality and activity are in common. Where idea means realization and realization is idea. Where thinking and acting have one source. We are interested in this very intermediate level not achieved by a horizontal consideration of these pairs, but only by a new, non-horizontal dimension. Unlike Hegelianism, Marxism, communication theory, and in principle the entire structure of modernity, we are not interested in anything that sits upon the line between theory and practice. We are looking for something that does not belong to horizontal subspace, or to some ratio-based configuration of the columns, or to the line between theory and practice. We are interested in something hidden under the theory and practice, somewhere in the common root they both grow from. From this point of view, the question of the prioritization of either conscience or matter during the Soviet period is absolutely wrong. The priority for us is the problem of the common root, and we should grow the fourth political theory and its practice from this root. Having acknowledged this notion as being basic, we can say that fourth political theory is theory to the same degree as it is practice, and it is practice to the same degree as it is theory. In other words, if we can feel the quote-unquote between related in depth over these two columns, if we can seize the geometry of this political vector, we will see that these two trees grow from the same roots. If we focus on the subject of the fourth political theory, meaning Dasein or Inzwisken, we will understand that it does not belong to the horizontal disposition between these two columns. Why do we talk about roots but not the head? This is a very serious and deep moment, because we should realize the reduction that is being made. If we realize the horizontal reduction first, and we get an unsatisfactory result, we will conclude that we should instead realize the vertical reduction, to move towards ontic roots, but not ontological heights. Therefore, we should postpone such notions as the dimension of spirit and the divine, and move towards chaos and other vertical and depth-oriented concepts. Nietzsche said, quote, "Not when truth is dirty, but when it is shallow, the seeker of knowledge steps reluctantly into its water." According to this, how can we try to form a clear conception of what fourth political practice is? By reversing the order of these two columns as a first step. We should obtain practice as theory, take principle as manifestation, mentality as activity, and thinking as action. What is fourth political practice? It is contemplation. What is the manifestation of the fourth political practice? It is a principle to be revealed. In what aspect is the myth realized as ritual? It becomes theurgic fact. Let us recognize that Neoplatonic theurgy is the reanimation of statues. What is activity as mentality? It is the idea that thoughts are magic, that thoughts can change reality. It is a suggestion that thoughts replace reality as fact. Fourth political practice brings us to the nature of the supranatural world, to the antithesis of Weber's metaphor in the realization of the technological aspects of the project. What is the supernatural world? It is a world where there is no barrier between idea and realization. It is the principle of adopting a magical view of the world based on the idea that thought is the only thing that crosses worlds, and everything we cross with is nothing more than a thought. What kind of thought is it? Pure thought. The vehicle of fourth political theory and practice lives in a supranatural world. What is menactivity? It is a trans-substance, a transformation of spirit into body and body into spirit, and it is the main problem of Hermeticism. We have come to the realization that fourth political practice is not a rough realization of fourth political theory in some space where the theory is suggested to be different from its practice. There is no more space, no more topos, and no more topology in fourth political practice aside from theory. We have annihilated any other spaces before we started. not in the consummation, but in the very beginning, before we started in a pre-ontological context. In other words, we should not look forward or backward if we really want to change the squalor we live in, because all the remnants that have made this ultimate form of degeneration possible and real have appeared and been stored there. These roots are not mere chance. The scrap heap we exist in is not accidental and has a profound logic. Here, primordial metaphysics is expressed in techniques both modern and postmodern. Accordingly, the only path for real political struggle is appealing to the fourth political practice as to the roots, free from the evolutionary process, from the very conception to the final point where we are now, because either our political struggle is soteriological and eschatological, or it has no meaning. And here we come to the last point. What does a world avoiding any duality look like? It looks like postmodernity, like virtuality. The wired and virtual contemporary world just says, this is not theory and not practice, not principle, not manifestation, not myth and not ritual, not thought and not action. Virtuality is just a mockery of the fourth political theory and practice. It is counterintuitive enough. But this postmodern reality is closer than all previous topologies, including the theological and proto-theological. Virtuality is closer to the very unique model of fourth political theory and practice than any other element. Thus, we can raise the question, how does our traditionalism or new metaphysics relate to postmodernity? I consider them to be very close. Virtuality tries to mix the semantic fields of the columns on the horizontal level so as to become indistinguishable. We can say that Deleuze's rhizome is a postmodern and post-structural mockery of Heidegger's Dasein. They are alike, and they are often described in the same terms, but pay attention to the fact of how postmodernism solves the problem of the reversal of the column's order. It solves the problem by appealing to the surface, and this is the main idea we see with Deleuze. Remember, his interpretation of Artaud's body without organs, his interpretation of the necessity of destruction, of the leveling of structure, and his interpretation of man's epidermis, his outer layer, as the basis for the screen onto which his image is projected. It is a point of mockery where fourth political theory and postmodernism meet each other. If the columns mix horizontally, some madness appears. We can use the thesis that Homo integros, the complete integral man, consists of Homo sapiens and Homo demens. Deleuze says, free Homo demens. He says that madness should escape from under Homo sapiens and realize the transgression between these two columns in the political sphere. Here comes the rhizomatic process, ionic and chronological ideas of temporality. This postmodern dementia is much like the fourth political theory, and differs from it only in its horizontality and flatness. The main problem of postmodernity is its elimination of any vertical orientation in terms of both height and depth. The end times and the eschatological meaning of politics will not realize themselves on their own. We will wait for the end in vain. The end will never come if we wait for it, and it will never come if we do not. This is essential because history, time, and reality have special strategies to avoid Judgment Day, or rather, they have a special strategy of a reversionary maneuver that will create the impression that everyone has come to a realization of an understanding. This is the huge arsenal of Heidegger's Noch nicht, or eternal not yet. If the fourth political practice is not able to realize the end of times, then it would be invalid. The end of days should come, but it will not come by itself. This is a task. It is not a certainty. It is active metaphysics. It is a practice. And it can be a potential and rational solution of the enigmatic layers that are discovered while talking about the fourth political practice.